Prom season is just around the corner, and last summer, 2 teens from Springfield survived a near-deadly crash after their prom. And while they're still alive, that night has changed their lives forever. 22 News reporter Jacqueline Jing explains.
It was like any other prom night. Smiles, group pictures, dancing, fun. A night Sabbath seniors would never forget. But this crash on Allen Street in Springfield made this night truly unforgettable.
The engine was, lodged on my lap. I couldn't move. I wasn't budging, so I just told him, just go for Naeem.
Nearly a year later, you can still see where the car crashed, glass, pieces of the car scattered on the ground. A grim reminder of the night that still haunts the driver, Casey Callender.
I was driving, I was responsible, and, I should have took the brunt of everything that happened.
After the accident, both of them were hospitalized. Casey broke his leg in multiple places, but he made it to graduation. Naeem Mahfouz was in a coma for nearly 3 weeks.
I just cried and cried and cried and cried. I barely even slept. I barely slept at all, just because of the fact that I was, terrified of what I would see when I closed my eyes. If there was any way possible that I could have switched me and his position, I would have did it in a heartbeat.
This is Naeem now, the former wrestler who received a full-ride scholarship to Fairfield University, now has severe short-term memory loss and suffers from tremors that restrict him to a wheelchair.
Faith, just keep the faith.
He says his friends have helped him get through the tough times, especially his best friend Casey.
Yeah, he's perfect. Casey's such a good friend. He's my boy, cause I'll do anything for him.
He's my brother. Love him to death. Guess every time I look at him, I'm just grateful.
What's the first thing you think about when you think about road trauma? Feel free to shoot out some answers. Car accident. Grief, maybe? Death and cemeteries. Road accidents affect thousands of lives each year in Australia. Generally speaking, a natural feeling of discomfort is endured when the topic of road trauma is comprehended. This may be due to the fact that it's something totally unexpected and therefore the individual has only seconds, if that, to cognitively and physically prepare for the moment of impact and its aftermath. Furthermore, consider the fact that it can very well happen to anyone that steps into a motor car and consequently die because of it. It is frequently seen in the media that news of road trauma results to death. However, little attention is given to those who survive a road trauma experience and how they felt being so close to death. Inevitably, road trauma and death are continuously being associated by society and hence resulting in a negative connotation. This may be one of the reasons why there is little understanding of how people experience long-term recovery from road trauma. Many studies to date have examined the psychological and psychiatric consequences of road accidents in the short term, but few have moved to a focus of the psychosocial and subjective aspects of recovery and the long-term challenges of this process. So let us note some statistics. It is estimated that worldwide there are over 1 million facilities and 50 million injuries of road crashes each year. Road accidents account for 2.1% of all deaths and 23% of all injury deaths. Road injury is the 11th leading cause of death and the 9th leading cause of disability adjusted life years lost. Road crashes are the leading cause of death for people under the age of 45 in Australia. 20% of trauma patients in Australian hospitals are road crash victims. Road crashes are estimated to cost Australian community over 18 billion annually. In Australia, the road toll reflects hundreds of people who die as a result of road trauma every year. There is a lesser-known road toll, however, that reflects the people who are physically and psychologically injured in road trauma.
Hums and Talbot's article, written in 2007, The Aftermath of Road Trauma Survivors, Perception of Trauma and Growth, informs readers of the psychological impact of road trauma on an individual who has been involved in an accident. Prior to Hums and Talbot's article, an Australian study was undertaken to determine the effects of traumatic vehicle accident on the prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorders. This involved 24 patients observed after 18 months from their hospital discharge. The study showed 25% of these patients had clinically significant post-traumatic stress disorder. This finding shows a large percentage of survivors develop post-traumatic stress disorder either acutely or within a year of the motor vehicle accident. Hums and Talbot conducted an anonymous survey and interview to research trauma survivors from 1996 to 97 from a Victorian rehabilitation centre aging between 22 to 85 years. The participants suffered severe injuries which required acute and rehabilitation treatment. The results showed 86% reporting further physical difficulties due to a change in lifestyle, as well as the pain experienced, while 62% experienced psychological difficulties. These difficulties involved an increase in anxiety and stress as a result from the harm. 17% reported spiritual difficulties, 55% expressed social difficulties due to a loss in self-confidence as a result from the aftermath of the trauma, where 99% of the participants reported signs of positive growth and only one participant did not experience this. The survivors, as part of their growth, were able to develop strength and become empowered to recover from their trauma. Specifically noted were three key areas: their sense of self, their relationships with others, and their personal philosophy or worldview. The study supported that the individual's psychosocial factor of distress were associated with physical, spiritual, financial, and legal difficulties as the negative consequences after the vehicle accident. Of the participants, 24% reported higher levels of growth change from the accident, while 19% reported very small amount and 28% reported moderate growth.
Harm's 2004 article, After the Accident, Survivors' Perception of Recovery Following Road Trauma, was a 3-year study which included survivors from 2000 to 2001 and was conducted 3 to 4 years after the accident. The article researched and documented on long-term adaptation processes to the trauma experienced during the road accident. The information was retrieved in a subjective manner and obtained purely for psychosocial information. The research measured 4 areas: the impact of the event scale, the post-traumatic growth period, the life orientation test, and the level of social support the individual received. It was found that most individuals surveyed did experience difficulty 3 to 4 years on since their accident. 86% of individuals surveyed reported that they had sustained ongoing physical difficulties. Most of these difficulties were changes in lifestyle, mobility, and levels of pain. 2/3 or 62% of those surveyed reported psychological distress difficulties. Psychosocial difficulties were most likely to be in the form of general anxiety or stress responses. 79% of individuals surveyed reported the accident to be the most traumatic event they had experienced in their lifetime. Of those that saw the accident as the most traumatic life event, concerns expressed were about being confronted with death and the possibility of losing their life. The accident being a life-changing event and suicidal thoughts were also noted. Those that reported that this wasn't their most traumatic experience noted that it was due to other reasons, such as divorce or separation, dealing with a husband with a life-threatening disease, or they had perceived the recovery to be worse than the accident. Social support was one of the most commonly identified recovery resources. 64% of respondents made some mention of some type of social support. Social support came in many different forms, mostly from immediate family members. However, community groups, churches, neighbours, and pets also contributed.
47% of those surveyed made mention of their attitude towards recovery as an enabler towards their recovery. For the 47% that identified their attitude as an enabler towards their recovery, they put it down to determination, inner strength, positive focus, wanting to return to normal function, hope, and the importance of the belief in their inner self. 29% of those involved in the survey recognized recreational resources as an enabler to their sense of recovery. Resources such as music, sport, books, gardening, relaxation, and meditation were all mentioned as leisure activities that helped individuals recover from an accident. 22% of participants recognized health professionals to be the most helpful in their recovery. Health professionals recognized were physiotherapists, counselors, doctors, and other medical staff. When comparing the literature, we found some similarities where both articles aimed to determine whether the individual developed post-traumatic stress disorder after the road accident or if they were able to move forward from the accident. These articles both showed examples of how the survivor of the accidents grieved and had thoughts of possible death due to the pain and trauma from their accident. Harms 2004 found that years on from the accident, post-traumatic stress still continues. The study examined the lived life experience of individuals after their accident had occurred. Both physical and psychological effects after an accident were found years on. The study found that a minority of individuals surveyed experienced thoughts of potential suicide. Although this number was small, 12.5%, the existence of these thoughts still existed. This showed the level of grief experienced from individuals to be extremely high. However, it was found that social support, a positive mindset, leisure activities, and health professionals all assisted in the recovery of the individual.
Harms and Talbot 2007 found that the experience of growth was the most common experience for the participants who suffered from an accident. This particular study aimed to determine whether they suffered from post-traumatic stress or if they were able to adapt and move forward. It focused more on the psychological distress of the victim, where they experienced emotional grief towards their trauma. 86% of the participants reported continuing to deal with physical difficulties such as chronic pain and limited mobility, and therefore grieved their loss. However, psychologically, the aftermath was described as the most traumatic event in their lives. This trauma overall impacted the psychological capabilities into leading to further mental health illnesses, which will need to be reviewed in case their case worsens. Although both articles were quite similar, Harms 2004 focused more on the individual's lived experience from the accident years on and how they've adapted. It measured the individual's level of physical and psychological trauma experienced since the accident and therefore measured the level of grief experienced and how this had changed during the years of recovery. In contrast, Harms and Talbot 2007 surveyed victims and the impact it had on their physical and psychological health. This article mainly looked at the psychological health and how they experienced stress and anxiety from the trauma, and its increasing in developing post-traumatic stress with a large focus on the grieving process when moving forward.
So how can healthcare professionals advise people on what to do post-road trauma experiences? In Australia, there are many profit and non-profit organisations that are able to help those who have experienced road trauma and survived, and also support the victims' families, bystanders and witnesses. Examples include Road Trauma Support Services Victoria, RTSSV. It is a not-for-profit organisation contributing to the safety and well-being of Victoria road users. They provide counselling and support to people affected by road trauma and address attitudes and behaviours of road users through education. As the only organisation of its kind in Victoria, they provide the following services across the state: free professional face-to-face and telephone counselling, support and training education programs. Also, Road Trauma Support Team of South Australia is a similar organisation as to RTSSV. Their mission is to provide psychological support for victims who have suffered road trauma. They also provide care and share meetings conducted by a clinical psychologist. Let's look at the future. How can we prevent road trauma casualties in the future and therefore decrease mortality rates? Internationally, road trauma is more frequent in developing countries as road rules are yet to be fully completed and enforced. However, in Australia, these two factors have been sufficiently executed, but yet road trauma statistics are still evidently high. A program that has elicited much interest recently in Australia, Victoria, is the Alfred Road Trauma Program. Let us take a quick look.
Secondary school students have been moved to tears during an emotional visit to the Alfred Hospital's trauma unit. Karen O'Sullivan was with them. Karen, just how powerful was the hospital's message to the teenagers?
Peter, you could describe today's journey through the Alfred Hospital as the most important excursion these students will ever experience. The teenagers have seen firsthand the trauma associated with speed, drugs and alcohol. It's been a compelling lesson in life and in saving lives. Coming face to face with road trauma victim Harley Doty was an overwhelming experience for Year 10 students from Roxburgh College.
It's really hard because I wouldn't want to make my parents go through what he goes through.
The victim of a freak car accident 3 months ago, Harley had part of one leg and one foot amputated. The apprentice panel beater joined the Alfred's new program to reduce trauma in young people, particularly from reckless driving, drugs, alcohol and assaults.
If I can get one of you not the bag here, it's a well-worth program.
His message getting through.
Just make the right choices. I don't want to be in here.
It shows other people like me, you've got to be careful and just think about what you're doing sometimes.
The hospital doesn't apologise for the program's confronting nature.
It's deliberately confronting for them, not in a moralistic sense at all, but simply as this is the way it is, these are the facts.
All Victorian schools are encouraged to include the Alfred's Trauma program in their curriculum. It's available to all students from Year 9 to Year 12. Intensive care staff volunteer their time ensuring the program is a success.
Well, I hope not to see these kids here in ICU as a result of it.
I'll never forget this experience.
Karen O'Sullivan, 7.
In summary, road trauma is something known to cause severe consequences. These consequences include psychological trauma, physical trauma, and in some cases death. An important factor to note is although a victim may die due to road trauma, there is still the grief and sudden loss experienced by the victim's family and friends, and in some cases it is so severe that thoughts of suicide may become apparent, leading to more death. What also needs to be noted is the effectiveness of someone who survives a road trauma experience. The fact is that these victims were so close to death and almost lost their lives and hence their future. This generally results to a significant impairment to their psychological state. Therefore, there is a clear correlation between road trauma and death, and although support is available in countries like Australia, more attention is needed to be given so mortality rates are able to decline. Thank you.